Welcome back to the No Nonsense Sustainability Podcast. I'm your host, Ildiko Amashi-Simsik, and today we're discussing something that's been on my radar for a long time. Well-being and employee well-being as part of the ESG initiatives. I have today Emily Warren with me, who's an award-winning HR leader, keynote speaker, speaking about culture, belonging, well-being, and she successfully transformed the well-being culture of a 5 billion company, and she's now available to consult. Welcome to the show, Emily.
Thank you, Ildiko. It's so great to be here with you this morning.
This show is more about sustainability, but we can't not mention the well-being of employees and how the employers and the companies are kind of targeting this often overlooked aspect of the S in ESG. The format of the show is that I have Bob the buzzer in case we slip into some buzzwords or jargon so that we can make this content accessible for people who are not familiar with these industry terms. So let's begin. What is a well-being initiative and what is employee well-being without using buzzwords or jargon?
So I think a lot of the time when we talk about well-being, we're really talking about wellness. And that word particularly evokes sorts of yoga, of smoothie bars, of candles, all of that stuff that we see from all of the big wellness brands. And that's why I don't like to use it in a corporate environment. Well-being really should be much more encompassing about that. And there's lots of different models of well-being, and most organizations will have their own kind of definition and pillars of it. But there's one that I like to use that I think is really nice and simple and straightforward. And there's a few organizations out there who use this as well. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about well-being. It's body, it's mind, it's heart, and it's soul. So body, I think we're really familiar with. We think of nutrition, exercise, sleep, physical health. But it's also things like energy and our ability to recover our energy and our physical safety and comfort. So from a corporate lens, things like ergonomics and health and safety really comes into this bracket as well. And then if we think about the mind, we quite often think just about mental health. But we should also be thinking about things like our ability to learn and grow and stretch, and also things like, can we manage our finances with confidence? That's an important part of what plays on people's minds as well. And then when we move to our heart, it's about being able to identify and express our emotions and be able to manage them proactively too. Can we have fun? Do we feel connected to people in our lives? Do we feel like we're part of a community? Do we have people that support us? And then if we move on to soul, and I think this is one that quite often gets forgotten, are we able to live life according to our values? Do we have goals that we can strive for? Do we feel appreciated and recognized? And do we feel seen, heard, and valued ourselves? So you can see that that's starting to tie into our sense of inclusion and belonging in the workplace as well. So it's much more all encompassing than I think a lot of people really think it is. And you can start to see some of those ties into how it might link to some of our more strategic work that we do in organizations and particularly within HR.
Yes. No, when I'm reviewing these ESG reports and they talk about employee well-being, they usually talk about like the Yoga Tuesday, that we provide subscriptions to the meditation app, that we have like on-site counseling, and it's all, like different aspects of what you've just described as well-being, but they're not getting to the root cause. So when you're working with organizations, what is their thought process that leads them into identifying these initiatives as the best initiatives for well-being?
That's a good question. And for a lot of organizations, I think there's three main things that I think organizations do wrong. The first thing is that they're often too tactical. So the person who's given the job of overhauling wellbeing is sometimes somebody quite junior in an HR team. It's a side of desk job, or it's given to somebody else quite junior. And that's not the fault of the person who's been given it, but it needs a more strategic thought process than that. It's also worth pointing out that the wellbeing industry really hasn't been professionalized yet in the same way that other parts of human resources has been. So you're actually seeing quite a new group of people sometimes coming into this industry without necessarily the skills and the experience to navigate it. And they're not getting that face time with the executives in their organizations, and they're not getting that leadership buy-in. And therefore, what they can do is this tactical work. So it's the awareness days, it's the apps, it's the fruit baskets. And those things are the easier things to do. So those are the things that get targeted first. The second thing that I think organizations aren't great at is listening to what their employees really want. And I think we all know this scenario. We go out to our employees, we give them the employee sentiment listening surveys, and we ask them what they think. And they will come back and they say, I don't feel my job is secure, and I'm worried about my financial position because we haven't had bonuses paid for a while. And I don't feel like I'm connected to the organization. And then we look at that and we think, well, job security, that means we've got to fix our business or, make our business more profitable. That's too hard. So we put it in the too hard box and we don't do anything about it. Now, it's really difficult to do some of these things, but there are things that we can do to help ease the uncertainty when there's job insecurity. So I think that's the second thing that I see with organizations that we're not really going into. And then the last thing is self-reflection on behalf of the organization. I think it's much too easy for us to blame employees for their own burnouts, their own issues in their personal life. If they're stressed, they're not resilient enough. And actually what we're not looking at is, what is it as an employer that we can do to help lessen the demands on these people? What is it that we might be doing through the way our business functions to cause stress to them? And I think if we had a little bit more self-reflection, that would really change how we think about the interventions that we want to put in for our organizations.
But in terms of like the governance structure, the well-being initiatives usually sit within the HR team.
So that's a really interesting question. I have seen well-being sit in all sorts of places. And again, this is part of the fact that it hasn't really been professionalized yet. So I've seen it sit in employee experience, in inclusion, in health and safety, in rewards and benefits. So it really does kind of move around a bit. And a lot of the times it's down to how that organization has evolved. And you'll see organizations that have had really strong health and safety departments. So say like utilities industry, then quite often their well-being evolves out of that need for health and safety. Whereas with some places, you'll see it evolve out of benefits, and where it sits absolutely shapes the emphasis you get on the well-being initiatives that people put in.
And based on your experience, what would be the best place for it? Because to me, it seems like, again, it's something similar to the rest of the social issues that I deal with, like through my job, where some would be with HR, some would be with like human rights teams or CSR teams. Others would be best suited with the health and safety team or engineering team, because it really is a combination of things. And now that you mentioned the ergonomics and the chair, like that was provided to me in all my offices, but I never thought of it as a well-being initiative.
Yeah. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. So when I looked at this in our own organization, we had this decision to make. It was originally in employee experience, but when we evolved it into a full-time function, we had that decision to say, well, where does this sit? And that we looked at benefits, we looked at other places in HR it could sit. And the thing that we came down to was we put it with inclusion, because there's so much overlap with inclusion that actually wellbeing really has the opportunity to amplify inclusion initiatives and get to people that maybe inclusion is missing or that have disengaged from diversity and inclusion efforts. And there's an infrastructure there quite often that is exactly what you need to be able to roll out strategic wellbeing initiatives. That being said, one of the things that wellbeing really needs to do is partner across the organization. So I used to sit on our citizenship council as well, because as you called out, we need that tie-in to sustainability. Because if you think about it, well-being is just human sustainability. That's what it's about.
Yeah, exactly.
But corporate citizenship efforts like volunteering, we talked earlier about this piece of soul where you want to feel purpose and valued. Well, corporate citizenship is a brilliant way of helping support that need in us. And of course, you do need benefits and things that uplift the employee experience. So you do need to work closely with your benefits team. You need to work closely with your health and safety team. I did during COVID. That was part of what we had to do. I helped roll out the mandatory vaccines in North America. So it's really a kind of portfolio type of role where it sits is maybe less important than how you see it, and knowing that it's got to be part of those partnerships and not getting too tied to what it is that the organization you're sat within is doing.
Now, let's say we have managed to locate this team in the right place within the organization. We do have our partners. We're thinking together strategically what to do. And still, our best idea is the meditation app and the stretching and let's do a 5K with the company. Why is that all of these initiatives are targeting individuals and not targeting the system that puts them in that position where they don't feel well in the workplace?
I think we're coming back to what we said earlier about the lack of self-reflection as an organization. So what is it that we're doing that is causing damage to our employees? And that is, I think, a difficult process for organizations, this idea that there's some culpability that you have. But also that if you actually do that exercise and you look at what you need to change, these things are really hard. So you're looking at things like, we've already mentioned job security, but career development. So we talked about being able to learn and grow and stretch, career development and, personal development. We need to be looking at, the way that we lead people. So there's a huge amount of leadership effectiveness in there. And none of these things are kind of easy, light touch things that you've got to do. And then you look at things like job design or team dynamics, and some of this stuff actually comes to the heart of how does your organization work? How does it make money? And any business that bills by the hour or by the day, or in some cases by the 6-minute chunk if you're in a law firm, that entire business model is working towards that idea of the more time you work, the more money you bring in. So that really doesn't sit well with ideas of maximizing people's outputs through having intense work periods of maybe 75 to 90 minutes and then taking a 15-minute break, because we know people are able to focus better, they make less mistakes, and they're more creative and they're able to join the dots in different ways. So, sometimes it's just too difficult to make some of those changes. And I think then you fall back on, okay, well, what can we do? What's easy? And there's often pressure to say, well, we need to make changes. Our people are saying they're unhappy. Maybe we're getting high attrition. So let's do something. And often do something is, well, that's easy. So I think you can see how people end up there.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the working, day rate or hourly rate, because that's literally our whole industry. And when I worked for one of these consultancy companies, I also had a utilization rate that had to be above, I don't even remember, 80%, for the month, which meant that 80% of my day, I had to have a code from a project that's billable hour or billable minutes. And I often felt like I don't have that space to lean back, think about my project and think about bigger added values. I was just a conveyor belt delivering. And I particularly like when you mentioned leadership, because I think what I've seen over the past 10, 15 years is a lot more emphasis on training leaders to be empathetic, to go beyond the project management and actually manage the people with their expectations and their feelings. How do you see the leadership training tie in with wellness or well-being initiatives?
So this is a really important point, and it's something that we invested significantly in. And part of this is, if you look at the history of leadership and what leadership means to us and how that's changed, because leadership for years has been about strategic vision. It's been about agility in the face of uncertainty. It's about negotiation skills, the ability to plan. All of those things are things that we have been selecting for and training for years. So if you go to an executive in an organization now, maybe for 20 years, those executives have been selected out for those kind of strategic and adaptable traits. And they have been trained in those strategic and adaptable traits. We have not been selecting for empathy, for authenticity, and those types of traits. And we've not been training them either. And so what we saw with COVID was this massive shift in what we expected from our leaders. All of a sudden, we were expecting them to be empathetic and open and vulnerable. And some leaders really excelled in that because they have those traits naturally. And some really struggled. And that's not necessarily the fault of the leader or a lack of desire on the part of the leader. Some people really want to be able to lead for well-being, but don't know how. So if you understand that context and you take the view that things like empathy are actually trainable skills, because you can learn empathy, you can increase your empathy if you work at it and you learn how to do it. So what we can then do is say, okay, how do we help our leaders learn how to create psychologically safe environments for their people? How do they notice when things are wrong for people? And when they've identified that something's wrong, how do we give them the confidence to navigate those experiences so that they feel that they're not intruding, but they're able to support and they know what to do. So I think that's a really key part of what we can do for our leaders in helping them develop how to lead in more human ways.
But that's very challenging to measure, right? It's not a KPI, like 80% of our employees are on the app for meditation. It's, you need a more refined way to measure that. And that comes back to like, okay, what is the return on our investment on these well-being initiatives? Because that's usually one of the reasons why they don't get that much budget, maybe that much awareness or interest from senior leaders.
And some of these things are longer term ROIs. So it's quite, you can see the return on investment of your app quite quickly. You can see the number of people who've downloaded it. You can see the number of people who are using it. That's fairly simple and straightforward. If you train a leader to be a good leader, and one of the things you're looking for is a reduction in burnout rates, it might take you 2 years to see that. Because burnout takes time to build. I mean, there's no fixed time scale for how long it takes for somebody to burn out, but you're looking generally at a period of months or even years. So if you've now got a leader who's much more attuned to creating a low burnout environment, then you might not see the output of that for a couple of years. And plus you might be looking across quite a small population. So it is a difficult thing to measure. So you need that trust in that process and to wait to see that return on investment. And again, this is hard for companies when you're getting pressurized from maybe the very top down, the board or whatever it is, on your attrition rates and what people are saying in your surveys about poor well-being. You're getting asked to show activity very quickly, but we really shouldn't be confusing activity and impact. And often I think the big strategic things that are really going to shift your well-being over time are getting deprioritized because we're getting pressured to see slow, short-term results.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about some of these initiatives like paying off at some point in the future. But based on your overarching definition, some of the elements of well-being are more individual. And I want to get your feeling on how companies think about employees' responsibility for speaking up, establishing boundaries, maybe not taking on the extra workload. And I know it's, everyone's perspective is that the other person is at fault, but based on your experience, is this conversations they're having at a top level?
I think it really depends on the company. I'm thinking about the organizations that I see presenting in awards nominations and things like that, and all of the well-being professionals that I know, and I think it's still the minority, to be honest, who are really looking internally to say, what is it that we're doing and what is it that our employees are doing? There is absolutely an employee responsibility here. But I think the research now is really saying for things like burnout, and I mentioned burnout because it's one of our biggest reasons that people take time off work for mental health. For things like burnout, there's been some brilliant research from, and I want to particularly call out the McKinsey Health Institute here and Barbara Jeffries and her team, because what they did was they looked at burnout in a slightly different way. And I think a lot of people are thinking of burnout as being on a kind of spectrum from holistic health at one end and burnout at the other end. And what this research did was say, actually, these aren't two different ends of the spectrum. It's two axes. So if you think we've got holistic health running in one direction, and
but What is holistic health?
So, oh God, I've been buzzed. I'm amazed I got this far without being buzzed, to be honest. So it's all of those physical health indicators you think about. So we went back to the beginning. It's our mental health, it's our physical health, it's our sleep, our exercise, our nutrition, all of that kind of stuff.
Okay. And some of that is not an employer's responsibility.
Like when
I go to bed, what I eat. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a kind of mix there, because you've got to have the time to do it. But
yeah,
if I'm not eating properly, that's a large amount of that might be down to me, or if I'm not going and exercising.
So that sits on one of the axes.
So that sits on one of the axes, and the other one is burnout symptoms. And what they found was that these things can coexist. So you've got a portion of people who are faring well, where they've got low burnout symptoms and high holistic health. So they're eating well, they're exercising, they don't have, lots of like chronic illnesses, and they're not showing signs of fatigue or stress or those types of things.
I think that's a very, very low percentage of people.
It's actually not as low worldwide as you'd think, but yeah, it's I'm trying to remember what the numbers are globally. I think it's about 34% or something. It's not terrifying,
okay.
But there's this other sector which I think a lot of corporates would be really familiar with, and that's the stretch zone. So this is people who have high holistic health and high burnout symptoms. And I think you will know, if I describe these people, you will know this. So they're the ones that work long hours in high stress demanding jobs, and they still go running, and they still look after what they eat, and they try and get a good night's sleep, and they try and spend time with their friends. But work is a big part of their life, and it is demanding. Now,
and can we just go back to the burnout symptoms? Or what are these like elements of burnout that we might not recognize in ourselves?
So the World Health Organization defines burnout as having three kind of core identifiers. One is this feeling of fatigue and exhaustion that I think is what most people identify burnout with. There is also cynicism. So when people start to be slightly sarcastic about their work, or this sense of, oh yeah, but obviously we're not going to get our bonuses paid, or yeah, we're not going to win that deal, or, those types of thoughts creeping in. And the third one is feeling of, professional inefficacy. So you start to doubt your own abilities, and your own skills, and those three things are the like kind of core things.
It's almost like the imposter syndrome, where you don't feel like you don't know what you're doing, or that you're not good enough.
Yes, it's a little bit of that, and you can see how when there's too many demands on you and you can't meet those demands, and the workload is always higher than you could ever achieve, no matter how many hours you work, how that might start to get internalized, and a feeling of, well, actually, I should be able to do this, or it's me that's failing, rather than the job is not set up for me to be successful.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very key point, I think. That sometimes these organizations are not setting up their people to succeed. They're setting them up, the reward for working well and efficiently is even more work.
Yeah, exactly. If you want something done, you give it to somebody busy. But the problem with this is that your individual interventions, so this, keeping yourself as healthy as you can, will only buffer you from burnout for so long. So what you can see is you only need to push that little bit harder, make people work that little bit longer before some of these things start dropping away. So maybe they aren't able to get out for their lunchtime walk every day. They aren't able to cook dinner, so they eat something that's sort of pre-prepared and maybe less healthy. They're stressed, so they aren't sleeping as well. And it doesn't take much then, once you start withdrawing those supports, for people to just slide into that drowning zone where burnout can start to take hold. And the really interesting bit about this research that McKinsey did was they looked at what are the drivers and enablers for this. And when they looked at holistic health, they found that the employee had a big part to play in what they could do to help boost their holistic health. But when they looked at the drivers of burnout symptoms, they found that overwhelmingly the causes were your job. So your job design, how it's set up, how it works, the actual core functions of it, and your team dynamic. So how your team functions together. So those things together are things that are in control of the organization. They're not in control of the employee. And the World Health Organization defines burnout as a workplace issue. So really, we need to get out of this mindset that if somebody has a burnout, it is something that they have done wrong, that they are at fault for their burnout. And I think we still see it that way in a lot of cases. It's, what's gone wrong in their life that's caused this to happen. Whereas really, we should be looking at this as a symptom that something is wrong in our work environment and looking internally to say, okay, well, what's gone wrong here that burnout has happened? And I'm not saying, I want to be really clear about this, that things won't happen in people's lives. People will overwork themselves. They do.
Yeah.
But they will also have family issues. They'll have bereavements. They'll have illnesses. There'll be things in their lives that are contributing to this situation. But how have you created an environment where people are talking about their well-being regularly and are comfortable asking for help when they start to struggle? And how are you as leaders looking out for your people and noticing when you're seeing changes and intercepting if necessary? So there is a lot we can do as organizations to work with our people on these areas, even when maybe the core demands or the stresses are coming from outside the work environment.
Yeah, no, it's interesting when you say talk about people's well-being, because I've been in many workplaces where they asked me how I was doing. They were like, it felt like genuinely concerned about my well-being. But then when something actually went wrong and I shared, there was no skill to manage that. It's one thing to ask the question and have empathy for the feeling or for the person. But then how do you take that further? Are you offering time off? Are you offering to reconsider workload? Are you how are you as an organization preparing your leaders to reply to these incidents outside the workplace with the right level of emotional intelligence?
And that's bringing us back to what we were talking about earlier with that training for leaders, because what you're saying is we've got to that point where we've noticed. So we've either noticed that something's going wrong or you've said. So we've definitely noticed that there's an issue, but it's how do we navigate that? And we don't just need empathy, we need compassion. So empathy is where I'm feeling it with you. And that's great. We need that. But compassion is, and how can I help? What can I do to support you? And being able to really navigate that. And sometimes people don't know what they need, and you might need somebody who's been through it and who can give some suggestions. But sometimes they do know what they need. And it's therefore down to leaders to say, well, how can we make that work? How can we work with HR to actually help these things? And HR aren't the enemy here. They do have,
It's important to say because they don't have a good reputation for this.
I know how some people view HR. You know, they hire, they fire. They're here to tell you when you've done something naughty. But really good people teams, and I want to use that term here. We're seeing the emergence of chief people officers and people teams.
Yeah.
They do care about the people in their organizations. We're seeing that evolution of thinking. It's not about resources. I think resources is utterly dehumanizing. It's an awful word to use. And those words help us think about these things, help us think about people as if they're objects. And then we've got employees, but that's your work persona. But when we start saying people, that kind of forces us to start thinking about the person behind the employee and about more than just the resource. And there is a lot of expertise usually in these teams. They will have seen burnouts. They'll have seen the family breakups. They'll have seen, that they may well have supported domestic abuse survivors, for example, to leave their homes in a safe way. You know, there's a lot of goodness that comes in all of these HR teams that can be pulled upon, that I think the reputation of HR sometimes gets in the way of. And that's why I love to see this evolution of actually, no, we're people teams. We're here to not just be the kind of gatekeepers of people, but we're there to support them as well. And for organizations like I think you described with things like consultancies or again, law firms or anything really where people are part of your product, if you're not looking after the health of your people, you're devaluing your own product. You know, you wouldn't leave a big, if you were a greengrocer, you wouldn't leave all your vegetables out just overnight to get rained on and get frosted. And you just wouldn't because that's what you're selling. You want to look after your produce and make sure it's in as good condition as possible. And I think we need to take that same mindset to our people. If we're selling people or their expertise or their skills or, even if you're in manufacturing, there's a lot of skilled jobs that go into that. You don't want people making mistakes. You want them at their best to be able to produce their best. So let's start thinking of them as the thing that you're actually producing. And how do you take care of the value of that for your organization?
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons learned here. And as you pointed out, this whole sector is just getting to that stage where it can be formalized and it can be set up as like a equal business unit to the other ones. Looking into the future, how do you see well-being initiatives across organizations being adapted in a way that works and moves from these individual interventions to a more systematic review of organizational culture?
So I think we are slowly starting to see the professionalization of wellbeing. It is becoming more established. You have more practitioners out there who are skilled and have the experience of doing this more strategically in organizations. You have more chief people officers out there who have had good wellbeing leads in their organizations and know how powerful that strategic approach can be. So I think it is expanding. There's been a lot of growth in this area, I think, over the last 5-10 years. So we are starting to see a more systemic approach to it emerge. We're starting to see some qualifications come out now for wellbeing leaders to teach them how to do this well. So I think those things will only be helpful. And the more we can upskill our wellbeing leaders, the more able that they will be to articulate what it is that will make a difference and to influence, because we do need those leaders to be able to influence at the top levels. I mean, I was extremely lucky. I always knew how blessed I was when I went to these sort of roundtables and people would be talking about executive buy-in. And I knew that my CEO wanted me in that position. We created the position of global wellbeing lead for me so I could do that. And it was a director level position. It wasn't a junior position. I reported directly into our chief people officer. She was a big supporter. I had an executive sponsor who sat on our executive committee. So I had this group around me. I had access to our chief operating officer, our chief finance officer. All of those people made it so that I could get the traction I needed with our executive populations, our leadership across our regions, and make stuff move. I think it's really difficult if you don't have that access and that senior buy-in. So it's the wellbeing leaders themselves having that capability, that expertise, that experience, but it's also our senior leadership as they start to come around to this idea that well-being and performance aren't an either or. It's not a scale that you need to balance. Well-being drives sustainable performance. And I think the problem is that we've got too much short-term measurement, because I think we all know that you can perform well with low well-being for short periods of time. You might be able to do it for 6 months, a couple of years maybe. But if you want to do it sustainably over a career, then you need well-being to power it. And if you want to create a sustainable organization, then well-being really should be a strategic part of it.
I think that's an excellent closure for this episode. My big takeaway is that well-being is a team effort. We need buy-in from everywhere in the organization. Thank you, Emily, for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ildiko. I've enjoyed it.
I hope you discovered a bit more about the employee well-being, the S in ESG. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on your own well-being initiatives and how your companies approach it. Thank you for being here with us today. We'll be back with some more next time.